Okay, so I'm gonna describe to you the capabilities, some of the capabilities of Illustrator. But going back to our learning outcomes for this course, I want to emphasize the second half of that learning outcome, which is to continue investigation through self-directed learning. This is really important. So in this class, we start from the beginning. So we're going to start from some really basic concepts. You can watch my tutorials and you can watch the tutorials and you can do all the things in the tutorials without ever having opened Illustrator before. Don't do this. Don't just use my tutorials. The thing about what will happen is you'll develop this thing called the fluency illusion, and that it's going to make you feel like you can do it, but you can't actually. You have this kind of illusion of fluency. So don't just do my tutorials. It's imperative that you continue investigation through self-directed learning. So we'll come back to this later, but basically, look at what other people are doing and try to do those things too. And yes, do my tutorials. So today we're going to start. For the first tutorial, I have uploaded a worksheet that you can download and work through along with this video. So again, one of the advantages of working with a video is that you can pause me, stop me, fast forward. What I've done is I have this cursor widget. Hopefully will help you follow along a little bit closer. And I also have a keystroke widget as well. So if I hit any command sequences, you'll see down here in the right corner, that'll show up. So what I want you to do with this file is, and it depends if you're on a Windows or Mac machine and what browser you're using, but what tends to work is if you right click on these links and you can choose download linked file as, and again, this is on Mac, not totally sure what that looks like on Windows, but download linked file as, and then I want you to make sure that you're going to the folder that you've set up. So under exercises, this is geometric shapes, and you're going to call this one, so this file is named just to show the convention that we're using, and you're going to give it your name. So it's just called your name, so make sure you change that to your name. So this is Andrew, and again, this is, so it's who, when, what, and where. And I'm calling these ones where you follow along a tutorial, and the ones where you take what you've learned in here and you apply it to your own, you make your own thing. Those are called exercises. So this first one is a tutorial, and it's called Tutorial Tools because I'm going to introduce you to the tools in Illustrator. And there's lots of little tricks. So I'm not going to introduce a ton today, but there's a couple of really good ones that I'm going to show you. And so that should download it. Here's some of the concepts that we introduced today. I'm just going to go ahead and hide Safari. And I'm going to close this here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually start I'm going to close Illustrator. And I'm going to show you here. Go here to exercises, geometric shapes. And I now have two here. This is an older one. I'm just going to delete it. Okay, so this is the file. And when I saved it, I changed the name. When you download it, it'll say your name. So make sure you change that to your name. So put in Andrew. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and right click on this. And I can open with Illustrator. This is the default one, If I just click open, it does the same thing. But you can see you can open it with different applications that has different results. We're going to look at that later in the course. But this will launch Illustrator. And I'll show you a couple things before we jump into the file. Just two quick things. One is, if you look at these sizes here, this is set up for accessibility. So, and I just did this as a demonstration to show if you need extra size with your palettes and your menu items, you can get extra sizes. This is one of the built-in Creative Cloud accessibility features. But I can't work at this size, so go to user interface. So just under preferences, user interface, and here you can set the size for your UI, so your user interface scaling. So I'm going to click OK, and I have to restart Illustrator, so that's okay. So accessibility is a big issue in design. It used to be just kind of this afterthought, but now when we make things that are accessible, we find that they actually work better for everyone. So for instance, if you think about closed captioning, that was created for, so at the bottom of the screen when you're watching a movie or you're watching a show on TV, there's this closed captioning, so the words appear at the bottom. That was created for people that had that were hearing impaired. But turns out that it works really well in sports bars, in pubs where there's a lot of noise, you couldn't hear the TV, so you can read what people are saying. So it works. So if we make things that are accessible, they work for other cases too. So so this reopened Illustrator. It didn't open the file, so that's okay. So this will give me a chance to show you some of the things I wanted to show you. So almost all the Creative Cloud applications have this interface when you first open it. So I just want to show you a couple things here. One is this Learn button. And so again, going back to this idea of continue investigation through self-directed learning. This is really important. I've talked about it in class, and I'm going to keep talking about it during the course. Here's a bunch of tutorials that are built into Illustrator. So they're from Adobe. You know that they're going to be using the latest software. And I strongly recommend that you take the time and try some of these other tutorials. Just find something that you're interested in and try it. So give yourself a little bit of time. Just don't do it endlessly. Give yourself a certain amount of time during the week to try another tutorial, or go onto YouTube and find out what some of these artists are doing. That maybe an artist that you're researching has ways of working and they post it on YouTube. So here, and there's more down here as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and go open, and we're going to just start working right away. And I'm going to show you some of the options for how you open files later and what those look like. So here I'm going to go to open, and should be saved here. Yeah, so what happened is that's a recent file that I've used. So if you look at the tree, it'll open the most recent. It'll save these recent places down here. So geometric shapes, and I'm going to go ahead and open this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I have a template here for some of the key tools, and then a little bit of a practice artboard as well. So starting right off here, Illustrator supports multiple artboards. So here you can see all the artboards are the same size. They don't have to be. Illustrator supports artboards of different sizes. This one comes with a bunch of artboards. I'm going to be getting you to create artboards as well later. So what are artboards? Artboards are like pages, and again, they can be different sizes. But it's a way to organize your work, and you can actually take an artboard and move it around and organize things. Over here on the right-hand side are your palettes, and on the left-hand side are your tools that you're going to use to draw, select, and modify objects with. So what I want you to do so that make sure we're looking at the same thing. Over here on the far upper right corner, see a little widget that says Switch Workspaces. So I want you to go ahead and click on that and go and click on Essentials. And if nothing happens, go ahead and go Reset Essentials. And that'll reset your Illustrator so it looks the same as mine. And it's a bunch of it's just a default setting, and it's very basic. What I'm going to get you to do though is I'm going to get you to open one more palette. So right here along the top, this is where all the palettes are stored under Window. So I'm going to get you to go here and open a palette called Artboards. And when you open this this palette, Artboards palette, you can see that there's a tab here. There's an asset export. We don't want this right now. We'll get to that later in the course. Just take this one and drag it out. So I'm just clicking on the tab, and I can drag it out. And what I'm going to do is I can dock it right at the bottom here. You can see at the very bottom there, when I scroll towards the bottom of all the palettes, that a blue line appears, and then I let go, and there's my artboards. And I'm just going to close this asset export. And I'm going to drag this up. So these are all the artboards that are in this template that I've made for you. You can move between artboards just by double clicking here. So I can just double click on an artboard and it moves to the artboard. So this is the way you're going to navigate between artboards in this tutorial. You're just going to double click on the artboard to move between different artboards. I'll show you a couple other ways of getting around here. So if you go to the bottom of your toolbar, you can see if I scrub over these toolbars, they highlight. And if I click, I can get other options. So underneath most of these tools is another tool. And you can tell that there's other tools underneath because there's this little triangle that says there's other tools. If there's no triangle, then you don't get other tools underneath. At the very bottom, this ellipses lets you access a whole bunch of other tools that aren't in the default toolbar. So before we keep going, so this, you open and close this just by clicking on the ellipses. It's like a toggle. I just want you to go ahead and go to toolbar and make sure you're on the basic toolbar, just so we know we have the same toolbar, and that way we will be working consistently. Okay, so underneath, so this magnifying glass here allows you to zoom in. And then if you hold your Option key down, you can see in my keycaster at the bottom that I'm pressing the Option key, the magnifying glass changes to a negative, and that allows me or you to zoom in and out. So zoom in, zoom out. Not the fastest way to zoom in and out, but it is one way of doing it. Another way that might be a little bit quicker and more exact when you're zooming with the zoom tool is just to click and drag. So that allows you to continuously zoom. But if you click and drag, you can see that you can zoom in and out. So dragging down, zooms in, dragging up, zooms out. So that's a little bit quicker. And I'll show you some other tricks for getting around in the interface. It is a very large interface. So if you go up here to view, you can see there's a few different zoom views that you can see here. So you can zoom in and out here. You can see one other thing too that I want you to notice here is that in this menu, beside the command is this shortcut. And again, as I talked about in class, shortcuts are really important for a bunch of different reasons. And one of the main reasons is just because it allows you to do things a lot faster. So there's also these other ones too, which is Command 0. So Fit Artboard and Window, that can be really useful. It's just 2 keys that you hit, and Fit All in Window if you want to see everything. So I'm going to click on this one, Fit All in Window, and here you can see all the artboards that we have. If I still have my magnifying glass, if I continue to zoom out, you can see that this is the pasteboard. So I think it's called the pasteboard. It's all the space that you have to work with. I can fill this full of artboards, but I can also put objects on that pasteboard. So objects that aren't on the artboard can also sit on the pasteboard. And this is a very important trick. Sometimes you'll find that you lose something in this large space. And so, like you might have, I'm just going to draw something quickly. So I'm going to take this rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a little tiny object there. Let's just see. I don't know if that drew something. Okay, now there's definitely something there. And you can see I can't see it. If I take my selection tool, I may be just like looking around. I could try zooming in and scrolling around, and that could take a really long time to try and find what I'm looking for. One trick for finding things in this huge space is go to Select, All, and you can see that it found that little thing there. So the selection, the selecting objects is one thing that we'll go over quite a bit, because there's a lot of different ways to select things, and selecting things is what you do. You choose things and you modify them, or you choose things and you move them. All these ways of working with objects in Illustrator is very important. I'm just going to delete this so it doesn't get in the way. And let's start right away with our pen segment tool. So we looked at the magnifying glass. Oh yeah, one more thing. One more navigation issue. Underneath here is the hand tool. So the hand tool allows you to grab the entire interface and move it around inside of this window. So if you need, if you need to get to the next artboard, you can actually click and drag. Again, that's a little bit cumbersome and slow to go way over here and click and open it up. So there's a shortcut, which is the spacebar. So if I hold the spacebar down, it will give me the hand tool. And I can have any tool selected, and then I can just temporarily get the hand tool by holding the spacebar down. And again, I want you to download that shortcuts cheat sheet and highlight some of these and memorize them. And again, memorizing isn't a cerebral thing. It's not in your head. You have to practice it. So the more that you practice using shortcuts, you're going to remember them. Actually, before I started teaching, I had a really hard time telling people which shortcuts were which, or where things even were in the interface, because I just got the muscle memory just told me what to do, and I could just do things quickly without even thinking about it. And I want you to get to the same place. Okay, so spacebar, hand tool, allows you to move back and forth, and the zoom tool, which if you look here, the hotkey is Z. So I can just take my zoom tool, zoom in, zoom out, or Command 0 allows me to go back to the artboard, or double click on the artboard here. Lots of different ways to do things, and you'll find your favorite way of doing things, and it'll come. That'll be the most natural way for you to do things. Okay, so property palette. You can see on the left-hand side we have this context-sensitive palette. It's one of the more powerful palettes in Illustrator. You should always have it open. As you change tools, it'll change. The options will change over here. So you can see what we have here. If I choose the selection tool, these are the options that we have here. This allows me to do a lot of things, turn on my rulers, guides, grids. We're not super worried about that right now. What I want to do is I want to go straight down and start working with the pen tool. Pen tool is one of the most basic tools that's been around forever. It's difficult to use. So you're starting with a more complex tool. It's very powerful, but we're going to start with a very basic. And what I want you to do is follow these guides that are put in here, just so you can try things. And then you'll get to do it without the guides as well. So drawing a line segment, what you want to do is, because Illustrator is based on mathematical coordinates for anchor points. So when you click, you create an anchor point. And then you can see that Illustrator is going to want to finish this line segment. So it draws this connecting line. And so what you're going to do is just position it roughly over there and click again. What Illustrator is going to try and do is keep drawing this line segment. So the way that you stop it, so you just draw one line segment, is you hit the escape key. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again, and I want you to follow along and do the same thing. And this other little magenta line that's showing up is a smart guide. And if it's getting in your way, which it is for me right now, I don't want to use it just yet. I'm going to go get my selection tool and deselect by clicking anywhere. So I just clicked anywhere where there isn't an object, and that deselects. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off smart guides. And I'm actually going to hide all my guides. I don't need them right now. I'm going to go back and get my pen tool. Here. And click there. You see smart guides are gone. It's not going to try and snap to different places. So again, hit the escape key to stop drawing. So that is a line segment. And it's one of the most basic elements in Illustrator. What I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to show you, if I go ahead and select this, so I've just switched over to my selection tool to select this line segment. And you can see over here that because I have a line selected, this properties palette changes. It tells me what the fill is, it tells me what the stroke is, and a lot of other elements too, like the coordinates and the size. I can actually go in and change those right in here. But right now, the only thing that I want you to pay attention to is the fill and the stroke. I want you to click on the fill, and here at the top of this opens a palette that allows you to choose from some colors, swatches that are embedded in your file. If you switch over here to the palette, that allows you to create a custom color. And what I want you to do is, for the fill, I want you to select none. That makes it transparent. And the stroke, you're going to make it black. So if yours wasn't that way by default, set it to fill none and stroke black. And here you can change the weight of the stroke. You can make it thick or really thin. This is called a hairline. It's 0.25 points. It's very thin. I want you to just work with a 1 point stroke. And do the same with this one. Make it a fill of none and a stroke of black. I'm going to go back to the pen tool. And these are line segments. We're going to create a shape. So we're going to start here. Click. And then you can see, if I go and click on that first anchor point, you can see that my cursor changes. A little circle appears. That means it's going to try and close the shape. It's not going to try, it's going to do it. It's going to close the shape. So here we have a closed shape. Before this fill, you couldn't see it, right? Because it doesn't have any space to fill. With this one is not filled. If I fill it with red, you can see this shape now. White, obviously, you're not going to see. I want you to keep leaving it to none for now. We're going to go back to fills later. But what we did is we created a couple of line segments. And now I want to show you an important idea in Illustrator, which is constraining. So when we draw a line segment, we can just draw it at any angle that we want. Or if we hold our Shift key down, it'll constrain it to a degree. So it'll constrain it to 45. And again, you can hit the escape key. It'll constrain it to 180 degrees. Escape. Or 90 degrees. Escape. So again, we looked at line segments, 1, 2, a closed shape, and then we looked at constraining our lines. So now what I want you to do is I want you to, every time, very consistently, when you open a file, save it very regularly. If you're working off the cloud, it'll save regularly. If you're saving off your local hard drive, you have to manually save it. So go ahead and hit save. And this is a really important one, Command S. And again, that's part of that those commands that are really close to the command key. So if your thumb is always on the command key, you can access all those commands really easily. So Command S saves the file. And I'm going to double click and go to the next artboard. Here I want you to practice. I want you to create 12 black line segments with different strokes. So, and I want them to be straight. So again, you're going to click, and they don't have to be straight. But if you want to practice holding the constrain down, that would be a good idea. So some of them I want you to constrain to 45, 90, or 180 degrees, and the other one's random. So I'm going to hit escape, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to change my stroke weight. I'm going to leave this first one like that, and then I'm going to make another one, and I'm going to start just overlapping them to see what happens. Escape. And I'm going to make this one nice and thick. Escape. And then I'm going to look here at the stroke palette and see what else I can do. So I tried a different weight. I'm going to try a dashed line and see what I can do there. Here you can see I can set a dash and a gap, so it's giving me a lot of control over it. So I'm going to set this to 3, and I'm going to make this stroke 3 as well. And I'm going to make this stroke very thin, and I'm going to reverse this gap, 3 and 12. So go ahead, you can fast forward me if you want. I just want you to try a bunch of different settings in here. Just try making line segments, and so you can try different things. And I want you to make 12 of these. 12 line segments. You can see that Illustrator supports a lot of flexibility in how you create strokes. So I'm just using my up and down arrows to change this highlighted field. So I have this field highlighted. I can tab between these fields. It's a lot faster than going and moving my cursor. So I'm going to make this a little bit less. I'm going to make this less. And then I'm going to try here adding a different, so it's like another gap or another dash. That's a different weight. And I'm starting to create some patterns in here in this line. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh yeah, supposed to do some constrained ones. So one of the really interesting features of Illustrator is how much flexibility you have with lines. Okay, so we're gonna look at this one. I'm gonna stop doing these dash lines, but what I want to look now is at these end caps and what I can do with those. So this one, it'll draw, so the anchor point is here, and if I have no end cap, the line will end right there. So let's draw a little bit thinner. But if I add a rounded cap, it'll do that. Let's try that one and escape. And then I'm going to do a square cap. And I think probably pretty close to a 45-degree angle. because this is such a large stroke, there was a drawing error at the beginning when I first drew it, and that was that hexagonal shaped stroke at end cap. That doesn't exist here. You guys may not have even seen that. So I just want you to make sure you've drawn 12. You want to see how many you've drawn without counting them by hand. Go ahead and select them and go to Window. Document Info. And here you have the option of selecting. It's selection only. How many objects is there? There's 11, so we need one more. Okay, so and you should be able to get to 12 without too much trouble. Yeah, so any dash will do it. Try doing all these, filling these all out. These look like, oh, these are all the same. Okay. So we've got a 12-point dash and 8-point dash. Oh yeah, because of the end cap. It's messing it up. Okay. There. A little bit different. So we looked at the selection tool and the direct selection tool. So the selection tool allows me to select the whole object. And you can see if I select something with the selection tool, I get this bounding box around that allows me to change my shape or change the object, so that the dimensions of it. If I choose the direct selection tool, that bounding box disappears. But what the direct selection tool allows me to do is it allows me to select one of the anchor points and change it. So those two selection tools are really important, and we're going to come back to them later. More. So that was practice with your line segments. Let's take now a look at the pen tool when we're doing a continuous line. So pen tool, again, click, click, and we have very thick stroke. I'm going to go ahead and change that back to 1. Because it's in the way, I can just grab the hand tool and move it. And you can see that just temporarily switches to the hand tool. The pen tool is still active. I haven't ended my line segment. I'm going to go ahead and finish that. And boom. So that is, and then again, if I want to end it, I just hit escape. Okay. So Command Z, undo. Undo is also up here. Undo. If I undo this and I want to restart my line, so I hit escape and I want to restart the line again, just take my pen tool and I go over this anchor point, and you can see that the cursor changes to a little line segment. That allows me to restart this line. So if you find that you lose the line, just grab the pen tool and just hover over that anchor point and it'll allow you to restart it. Escape. Now for the tricky part. This is probably the hardest part of working with Illustrator, is drawing curves with the pen tool. So ignore the single click thing. What I want you to do is, right before we were clicking and then releasing with our mouse. So click, release, and then go to the next anchor point, click, release. What you're going to do when you want a curved line is you're going to click and drag. And this drags out these things called anchor handles. So the anchor handles, they describe the curve. So now I'm going to go to the next anchor point and I'm going to click and drag. And I want my anchor points to be roughly equal. If they're not perfect, I can go back and change them later. But I want to go ahead and click and drag. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to click, click and drag. Okay, I'm going to have to redo that. Okay, so, okay, I have to hold the Option key down. That's how that works. Okay, let's start again. So from here, I'm going to click and drag, and click and drag, and I'm holding the Shift key down to constrain those handles so they're on a 180 degrees. What happens if I don't? If I just go ahead and click and drag, is that you have to make sure that your curves are as even as possible. And there's lots of tricks for getting, for drawing these curved lines a lot easier. This is one of the hardest tasks that you'll have to do. So if you find it really, like your line just isn't turning out the way you want it to turn out, don't sweat it, because you will be able to practice this a lot more. Okay, so here we have it. Okay, so here what we want to do is we want to break the curve and actually create a corner point with our pen tool. So you can see the pen tool is starting to help us. It's giving us this, it's changing here to change your direction. But what you have to do is you have to hold the Option key down and click. So that allows you to create this corner point. I'm going to keep going here. Click and drag. You can see these angles aren't perfect, but I can go ahead and change them later. And here, because we're transitioning to another curve, we don't need to switch to a corner point. And then again, Illustrator is going to try and keep drawing. So just hit the Escape key, and that that allows you to end the line. Okay, so so many options with these tools. The Shift key almost always constrains, so it keeps you to certain angles. The Option key gives you options. So here I got my pen tool. I'm gonna go back over this line, and if I hold my Option key down, you can see I can adjust these lines. It's not going to be perfect because I'm going to lose my constraining on my angles there, but it'll give me the opportunity to go back and make some little adjustments to these lines. So the other way to do it would be to go here and actually try and edit the angles. So I would take my direct selection tool and click on the anchor point, and then I can just drag this in, and that might allow me to keep these angles more consistent. So I end up with a cleaner line. So I'm going to go back to my pen tool, which is the letter P. Hold the Option key down, and that allows me to adjust this angle. So it's okay. It's not the cleanest curve out there, but it's all right. What I want you to do now is I want you to draw a bunch of shapes. So I want you to start with sharp corner shapes. Just want you to draw 24 of them, and I want you to overlap them. So just draw a whole bunch of different shapes. It's just good practice. It's developing muscle memory. And 24 different shapes. Just want you to fill the whole canvas. You can double click on here to zoom into there. I'm going to move this out of the way. Actually might drag it right into here. It's just a nice way to be able to count how many shapes I have, so I don't have to count them by hand. Computers are really good at counting. It's part of the name. If you think you're close, just highlight them, and now I have 7. So this could go really quickly because it's fairly easy. These shapes, and just I think at this point you're being pretty like intuitive. So if you want to think about like design as being intentional or intuitive, there's kind of like there's some things that you do which are gonna feel like you're not really thinking about it. But at the same time, I'm really reacting to what's there. And I may not be thinking intentionally about trying to create something specific. At the same time, in some ways I am really reacting to what's on the page. And as, again, this formal description that we have of drawing shapes that are closed with sharp corners and all outlines. So you're going to find here, if you have fills with these, you're going to start to lose shapes. You won't be able to see them anymore. Like these are going to disappear behind there. So make sure you have no fill for this exercise. And I'm up to 15. So kind of have fun with this. This is like kind of mindless, but at the same time, you're kind of developing this intuitive sense of how these tools work and what they can do. So the number of, it's like a martial art, the number of, so there I missed the spot. So I could actually go Command Z, undo, and do it again. So if you find you missed the closing anchor point and you really want it to close, or if you want to change something, go ahead and grab the direct selection tool. So A, maybe I don't like how this corner sits there. I'm starting to be more intentional about it. I'm really starting to think about how these forms are interacting together. A little bit, feeling a little bit constructivist maybe, a little bit like a Kandinsky or Naziski, Crown. There we are, 24. Okay, so 24 shapes. I want to show you this very advanced tool now, which is called the Live Bucket Paint tool. So this one is found underneath this other tool here, which is the Shape Builder. So the Live Bucket Paint tool. When you select this tool, you're going to see that there's some swatches that come with it. So the one in the center is the one that's selected. So if I want to fill with the block tool, you have to choose that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these shapes, and then I'm going to have a little bit of fun filling in the spaces. And if you want to change anything at this point, feel free to go in and make some adjustments here. This is a little bit wonky. This is a little bit fussy here, that little spot. I'm going to kind of want like fairly consistent feeling to it. Don't overthink it though. This is just a exercise. So I'm going to select all of these. And then again, I'm just using my arrow key to scroll between here, between the different swatches. And then you can see that when I scroll over a space, Illustrator highlights it and I can fill that. So it's kind of a magical tool. This used to be a ton of work to be able to do this kind of thing where you're trying to fill overlapping shapes. So just have a little bit of fun here and fill in these shapes in different ways. Find some shapes that you find interesting and yeah, have some fun. Okay, so you guys have done a lot already. We work with the pen tool, drawing curved lines, doing segments, constraining, so keeping things at even angles, and then we looked at this new tool, the paint bucket tool. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, switch over to my artboards, and then I'm going to go to practice with no corners. So I'm going to take my pen tool again, and this time I'm going to draw my shapes so there's no corners. And I'm going to have to change this to no fill, or it's going to be really hard for me to see things. So I'm just going to go over here to fill and set it to none. And then I'm just going to keep going. So you want to make sure that all these shapes have no corners. And when you get to the end to finish, to close the shape, if you started with a corner point, it's only going to draw the handle on one side. So again, but go over here to the pen tool, click and hold. I get this anchor point tool that allows me to change this. So I can actually take any of these points and alter them so that they're different angle. If you want to change a smooth point to a corner point, you just click and that changes it to a corner point. So just practice doing that. Create 24 different rounded shapes using the pen tool. So start by clicking and dragging so you get that curved line. I don't want to see any sharp points here. All of these points should be rounded. You can try doing a shape that has a lot of anchor points. That's a little bit tight there. Or you can see if you can do one with just two. Can you make a shape with just 2 points? Yep, you can. Yes, you can. So all you're doing is just being very intuitive and creating a bunch of different shapes. Start to feel a little bit like a Moreau drawing. I heard this really interesting story about Moreau. Did. Somebody wrote to him, a student who was very poor, wrote to him and said, hey, you know what, I know you're a great artist, I love your work, you inspire me, I don't have very much money, here's this check for, I don't know how many, I think it was in Spanish currency, before the euro, I don't know what they had before the euro. So he sent this check to Moreau, and Moreau did a drawing on the check and sent it back. Pretty cool. That story kind of stuck with me. You have a bit of a sharp corner here, so I can just select it with my direct selection tool, and then I can drag these anchors out. So in case you haven't guessed it, at some point I'm going to get you to trace your blind contour drawings that you did on the first class. That would be a good exercise for really getting to use some of these tools and mastering them. So this course isn't, this course is a mastery course. You guys are going to be Illustrator. The idea is you guys will be Illustrator masters. You won't be, this is not a, you know, learn how to use Illustrator so you can make cards for your, I don't know, what, your nephew's birthday. I don't know. That's good too. But really it's about mastery. It's about really learning how to use these tools really well. Okay, so I'm going to select this and see how many shapes I have. Document info palette, I have 18. So the more that you use these tools, the more fluid you'll become with it. It won't be something that you'll think about anymore. It'll really be a very you'll be much more mindful of what's happening with the strokes, and not so much how do I do this, but just like, you know, like, this is really interesting how these shapes are interacting together, and what do I like that's happening here, those kind of things, as opposed to like having to really focus on the tools themselves. So that's 24, so now I'm just going to take my selection tool. And again, I'm doing this thing that's called a selection marquee. So I could go ahead and select one, and then hold my shift key down and select another one, but that would take forever. So because I know that all this other stuff is on the background, it's actually on a separate layer. So this stuff, this guide stuff is on a separate layer, and it's been rasterized so it doesn't get in the way. This here, these lines here, I can select them all by just clicking and dragging across. So that just selects them all. And now I can take my paint bucket tool, and I can again, okay, I have to choose black. I only want you using black in this first exercise. I don't want you to spend any time selecting colors right now. Just master these tools in just black and white. So in graphic design, it's like this. It's the baseline. So things have to work in black and white first, especially like brand identities. So brand marks, they all have to work in black and white. And part of that idea is that it's because of fax machines. So when people used to fax things, oh yeah, your logo has to work in black and white. So you tell the client this. Your logo has to work in black and white because somebody might need to fax it at some point. But the fact of the matter is that if it works in just black, then it will work in just white. And so you can reverse it out of things. Where as soon as you start introducing, you know, grayscale to it so that your logo needs a tonal range to work, then you've introduced like a constraint. You can no longer reverse it out of colors, or it becomes much more difficult to do that. So go ahead and save this, file save, and go back to the artboards and go ahead and click on the curve tool. So this is Illustrator's solution to making curved lines. It's much easier to use. It does have some little quirks to it, but once you kind of figure it out, it's going to be much easier. So we were using the pen tool. For this exercise, I want you to use the curvature tool. So it works different than the pen tool. in the sense that you don't click and drag to create a curved line, because this one is only for using curves. You don't use it for straight lines. So you can grab your curve tool. There's no hotkey for it. I don't know why they, oh, there is a hotkey. It's shift apostrophe. That's complicated. I don't use it very much. It's relatively new, but it does make drawing these curves a lot easier. So you need 3 dots to create a curve. So you saw with the first one, it didn't really seem to be doing anything. As soon as I do the second one, then it started, finishing the curve. So you can see it allows you to really make your curves very smooth. So I'm going to click on there, and then I'm going to click again. No, that's not what it is. I think I have to option click. There we go. Yeah, so to get your corner point, again, option click. Oh, that didn't work. It's because I have because I set this to have a fill. So I don't want you to get lost in these exercises where the fill is getting in the way of your line. So make sure that you're setting this to no fill after each. So here again, option key. Oh, it's double click. I even wrote the instructions there. Okay. Double click. Okay, I'm going to go back to the beginning here and try this again. So the way it works is single click starts your line. And these curves need 3 points to create a curve. So another single click, and it looks like it's drawing a straight line. But as I start pulling this out, you can see that Illustrator is trying to create this smooth line. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. So the trick is when you need to do a corner point, a sharp corner point, you double click. And here I have left my fill on, so I'm going to set it to none. Click there, double click. Single click, and here on this transition point with the curve tool, you have to do a double click as well. So double click, click, and click. And it's going to try to do the same thing. It's going to keep drawing. So I just hit the escape key, and that ends my line. So way cleaner on the first pass of this line than is possible with the pen tool. You can go back and edit this with the pen tool. So I can do the same things here. Gives me all this control with the handles and the anchor points. But for doing that first pass on the curved line, way more powerful. I really, I'm not super used to it because, I spent 25 years working with the pen tool. So the curvature tool is still a little bit foreign to me, but it definitely has a lot of potential. I'm going to go ahead and click here, here, double click. Remember, you need the 3 points to create a smooth curve. Double click. And you can really do it anywhere along the curve. If you can find the exact spot, better. But if you can't, you can always go back and fix it later. But it just creates such a nice, smooth curved line. It's really hard to duplicate that with the pen tool. So this is the curvature tool. And like I said, it's relatively new. So one of the advantages of this online tutorial thing is if this is super basic for you, skip ahead. If it's not, I mean, if you already have mastered these tools, then yeah, move ahead. But if you're even a little bit unfamiliar with it, take the time to practice them some more. It's even some of these different ways of drawing lines. It's great to see. It's good to see how other people would do it. So here we have a wave shape that has a concave shape on the inside. So this is a sharp point. So I'm going to double click. Still needs the 2 points. Double click. Double click. I don't know if you can hear the double click on the video. Escape. I'm going to save this. Now I want you to fill the page with a curved line. Maybe practice making really tight curves. And remember, the more time you can spend practicing these tools, the closer you'll get to mastering them. Switch over to your fill tool. Just using the arrow tool to switch my swatches here. So this one was pretty quick. Spend some more time on it. Like don't be in a hurry to get through it. Okay. Go ahead and save it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over how to use the rectangle and ellipse tools. So these are probably even more common that you'll use these than you'll use the pen tool. So the ellipse tool is M hotkey. The rectangle tool. And again, make sure your fill is set to none. Go ahead and drag a rectangle. And here we get into this constrain idea again. So that is a rectangle. If I want to draw a square, so I want to constrain the shape, then I hold my shift key down. And that'll give me a perfect square every time. And the key thing is to let go of the mouse before you do your key. Because I'll show you what happens if you don't. I can be constrain, and you can see I don't have to worry about where my cursor is. It's still going to give me a square. If I let go of the option key first, it'll snap back to a rectangle. Not my option, my shift key. So I'm using my shift key down to constrain. That gives me a square. You can see that by default, Illustrator is drawing from the corner where you start from. So it'll start in this corner here. So wherever you click, I click, and it'll draw from that corner into whatever direction you draw from. If I want to draw from the center, that's where I hold my Option key down. I hold my Option key down and it draws from the center. If I let go of the Option key, it'll draw from the corner. And again, I can do the same thing. I can hold both down. So I can hold down my Option key and my Shift key, and then I get a square that's drawn from the center. The ellipse tool is very similar, except it can be a little bit harder to find that top corner, like where that exactly is. So as soon as I let go, I have these handles. I can actually go and modify it. So if I want to draw a perfect circle, again, same thing. I hold my Shift key down, and that gives me a perfect circle. And when I'm modifying it using these handles, I also have to hold my Shift key down. Otherwise, I end up with an ellipse. Same thing here. If I want to draw from the center, my Option key down and Shift. And that gives me a circle that's drawn from the center. Okay, I want you to fill the page with overlapping squares and circles. So, and then draw a circle, circle, switch to a rectangle, and I'm holding, it says circles and squares, so that means that they can't be, we have to constrain them all. So L gives me the circle tool, the ellipse tool. And try using a little bit of scale here. Play a little bit with repetition. Feel like you're doing a lot, and you are. So these are fairly long tutorial exercises. And again, the whole point is to get you practicing these tools as much as possible in order to really learn how to use them. Okay, so now I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to do some selective fills in here, using my shape builder tool. Again, using my arrow keys to scroll and get the black color in here. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. So far we've been working with drawing tools primarily. Now I want to look at some of the things we can do with the selection tools. So the selection tools are the two at the top. We looked at the selection tool and the direct selection tool. The selection tool again gives you, allows you to select a whole object, and the direct selection tool allows you to select part of an object. So just to illustrate how that works, I'm going to go ahead and draw a square. I'm holding my shift key down to constrain it. Don't know why I'm not getting my Smart Guide. Okay, fair enough. So I have a square. What I want to do is I want to take my selection tool and I want to drag this across here. I'm going to hold the shift key down to constrain it, but I'm also going to hold down the option key. And you can see as soon as I hold the option key down, it changes the cursor to a double arrow. And what that does is it makes a copy. So I'm constraining it along the same line and copying it at the same time. Now I'm going to take this handle here and I'm going to drag it out like that. So that is copy while dragging. So you're holding down the option key and that allows you to select something and drag it. I'm going to go ahead and take this original square that we drew and I'm going to practice this again. I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to hold the shift key down to constrain it and the option key to copy it and place it right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the edge, the corner here, and you can see if I go to any of the corners, it allows me to rotate it. If I hover right over top of that handle, it changes to a scaled cursor. But if I go just outside of it, it changes to a rotation one. This one here, same thing. The center ones, if I go right over top of the handle, it allows me to scale it. If I move just outside of it, it allows me to rotate it. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate it, and I'm going to hold down my shift key to constrain that. So it's going to rotate it on those even 45 degrees that we talked about. So now I have a diamond. Super famous Shreddy's campaign. I don't know if you saw that one, where they rotate. It started here in Canada, actually. I think it was J. Walter Thompson. They had this whole spoof campaign where Shreddy's was launching a new product, which is rotated. It's a diamond shape. So, okay, so we've been using the selection tool. If we switch over to the direct selection tool, I actually drew these wrong because the selection tool actually has in the toolbar, the selection tool is outlined and the direct selection tool is solid. But when you select it, that's when it shows up like this. So it's a little bit, you'll get used to it. Direct selection tool allows you to select part of a shape. The selection tool, it just selects the whole thing. You can't choose part of it. So if I switch over here to the selection tool and I choose this, I'm selecting the whole thing. If I switch over to the direct selection tool and I click here, you can see that it just selected this one anchor. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this out. You can also select the side too. You can select a corner of it. So if I go undo, I can actually, but this you have to be deselected to do this. I can go ahead and select here and I can hold the shift key down to constrain it and I can just select a side. So that's the selection tool, direct selection tool. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the selection tool, click here, and drag this across. I'm holding down my option key and my shift key to constrain it, option key to copy. You can see the cursor has changed. And again here, the key thing is let go of the mouse or your trackpad or your stylus, whatever you're using, let go of that first, then the keyboard. And that way you make a copy. If I don't do that, so I just undid that. If I go ahead and do this and I drag it all across really carefully, get it to just the right spot, and I let go of the keyboard first, then it moves it and doesn't constrain it. So not what I intended. I mean, it can be a happy accident for sure, but I have to decide to keep it. Okay, so here we have a copy, constrained, and now I'm going to do that thing that I showed you guys how to do before, which is to draw a selection marquee. So I'm using the selection tool, and I'm going to draw across here like this, and now I get to select both shapes. So selection marquee allows me to select both shapes. If I'm using the selection tool, I actually don't have to draw it all the way across because it's going to select both objects. And then I'm going to click and drag down, and as I'm dragging, hold the Option key down to copy and hold the Shift key to constrain it. So I made that mistake of having objects with fills. I'm going to get rid of it so I can see my guys underneath. And here's another difference between the selection tool. So the selection tool, here we have these corner widgets, and they show up with both the selection tool and the direct selection tool. So these corner widgets are pretty cool. What they allow you to do is turn a square rectangle onto a rectangle with corners. So you can control how much you want this corner. So you can drag it all the way down to make it a rounded rectangle, completely rounded. So the corner widget tool, if it's not showing up, you go up here to view and you go view, show corner widget. I don't know why it wasn't showing up in the first place, but it wasn't. Little glitch there. So I want you to do that. Turn that rectangle into a corner rectangle. And turn this square into a circle. So that's the corner widget. So we looked here at the rectangle, or the clicking and dragging. So we drag this across, resized it using the handles. And again, we did the same thing here. Click and drag, holding the Option key down while dragging makes a copy. Same here, and then we rotated it. And then we looked at the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool for how we can select individual shapes. Okay, now what I want you to do is go ahead and do the same thing here that you did with that one, where you select both of the shapes. So click and drag across, it draws a marquee, and it'll select both these shapes. If you moved this in one move, so if you didn't like move it and shift it, if you just moved it and got it in the right spot the first time, you can actually go up here and you can go transform again. And what that does is it does the same transformation that you just did. So just to illustrate how that works, we had this shape here. Let's get rid of the fill so we can see what we're doing. Click. So I'm clicking and dragging it down, holding the Option key. And I'm going to deal with the corner widgets in a minute, but what I want to do is show you what happens if you go Command D or Control D on the Windows. And that gives you this option here, transform, transform again. So it does it once more. So this is a very powerful technique. It allows you to create things like patterns very easily. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And I don't think I can do both at the same time. Nope. But I can if I use the direct selection tool. So switching back and forth between the selection tool and the direct selection tool allows you to see what some of the different options are. So here you can see if I use the selection tool and select both, so I'm just holding the shift key down to select the second one, the corner widgets disappear. But if I switch over to the direct selection tool, the corner widgets reappear. So I can go ahead and do that to all of them. Okay, so again, selection tool allows you to modify the whole shape all at once. Direct selection tool, so I'm gonna go ahead and select this. If I switch over to the direct selection tool, I can deselect one of these corner points by holding the shift key down. And now I can modify 3 of the corners at once. I can also go select, hold the shift key down, select the second one, hold the shift key down, select the third one, and drag these like that. So, selection tool, direct selection tool, we looked at transforming the shapes. Click and drag, holding the option key down, copies, drag and shift, constrains it. If you do, you can do both at the same time. And then we looked at these corner widgets and how we can use, the selection tool to make the whole thing rounded, transform all the corners at the same time, or the direct selection tool to do some of the corners. Okay, so that is modifying squares. Now I want you to create a pattern with rectangles. So I'm going to take my rectangle tool, and these can all be the same. What I want you to do is I want you to practice this dragging, holding the option key down, and then Command D. So Command D. So this is this one up here. Object, transform, transform again, Command D. And this allows you to create a pattern of squares. And then I can do the same thing with this. So drag it down, Command D, and that's it. So just a little bit of practice using the direct selection tool to drag your shapes and copy. We're going to look at the same thing with circles. The ellipse tool, remember I can draw from the center. If I hold the option key down, shift key constrains it to a circle. And now I can take my selection tool and I can drag this across like this to make a copy. I can take the handle, and again holding the shift key down to constrain it, and then I just drew a circle. I can do the same thing here. I can take a copy of this. This time I'm not going to hold the shift key down because I don't want to constrain it. I don't want it to go over here. I just want to make a copy, so I'm just holding the option key down. And this time when I resize it, I'm going to hold the option key down to resize it from the center. So same kind of idea, just thinking about shift, constrains, option, does other things. So in this case, it's giving us a copy almost every time. The option tool allows you to copy things as you drag them. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it across here. And then I'm going to resize this to an ellipse. And here again, if I want to resize from the center, option key. Resize from the center. So if I do from the side here, it's going to resize both the sides, but if I hold down the shift key, it'll constrain it to a circle. I'm going to drag this across to get my third shape. And then here I'm going to take these three shapes and I'm going to drag them down here. But I'm going to do one thing to them first. And that is I'm going to group them together. So I'm going to go Object, Group, and then you can see I can deselect. Now if I want to select them, I just have to click on one of them. And I can do the same thing, click and drag down, and then Command D. So circles, very similar to the ellipse tool, very similar to the rectangle tool. One kind of difference is, well, you don't have a corner widget. And also it can be a little bit harder to place a circle in exactly the place that you want when you're drawing from the top, from the edge, from the corner where you started. It can be actually easier to position a circle if you draw from the center. So I want you to do the same thing here. Take your ellipse tool, draw a circle, switch over to my selection tool, click and drag, Command D, marquee selection, copy, Command D. So here we have our final two shape drawing tools that we're going to use today, which are the Polygon tool, and that was named wrong. It's the star tool. So again, click here. It's got the little triangle on it, so you know there's more shapes underneath. And grab the Polygon tool. And this will default to whatever you've used last, I think. So here we have a hexagon. So again, if I want to draw from the center, hold the Option key down, can draw from the center. Okay, and here's one thing that's very unique about the Polygon tool. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my selection tool. So remember that's B as in Victor. I'm going to drag it across, holding the Shift key down. Okay, it's a little bit hard to see because of my guide, but you can see that there's this little widget on the side of the Polygon tool, and that allows you to change the number of sides. So if you want a triangle, which is the least number, you can drag it back here. And again, probably easier to resize it from the center. So I'm holding my Shift key down to constrain it, and Option key to draw from the center. So there I have a hexagon and a triangle. Okay, I don't know my names of polygons that well, but you need to practice drawing all of these, and then you're going to do it again because it's a little bit of a complicated tool. I'm going to get you to do it again as a pattern. So the most that it'll draw is an 11-sided polygon. Okay, so star tool. A little bit different with the star tool, because the star tool, I can draw a shape, switch over to the selection tool, so I get my handles. There's no little widget on the side to change the number of sides. So the way that it works with Polygon, with the star tool, is you hold your Option key down when you click. So that allows you to choose a number of points. So here I've shown you this here. So you hold down the Option key when you click, and that allows you to choose number of sides, but also the radius of the outside and the radius of the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and you can see here that my star is a little bit chunkier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Command Z, and I'm going to reduce the size of this inner radius, and that pulls that in and makes it a little bit tighter. So I'm going to go here to 3, and there I have closer to the shape that I intended. So I can grab the star tool, no hotkey. Don't use this very much, but it is kind of a fun tool to work with. I gotta stop saying kind of. It's a fun tool to work with. 15. Let's try 11. Let's try 100. It's probably more like this one. Probably more like 50. Anyways, you can see the kind of the potential of it. You could do some really fun geometric shapes using the star tool. Okay, so here I want you to do 24 different stars and polygons. You can see what happens here when you do. You can even invert it, or you can go, I mean, if you have less sides and you make these equal, you actually end up with a polygon. I mean, it has straight sides, a little bit hard to see. So double click on here to get my artboard in the center again. So this is when the radius were equal, then it gives you a polygon, right? So if I go, okay, three sides or 3 points. Okay, let's see if I can do 4 points. This is gonna give me 2 points. Can't do 2. Okay, so can't do a square. I'll have to switch over to here to get a triangle. So 3 sides. Okay. Okay, so one thing is if you do want more sides to your polygon, then you can get with a widget. You have to use the Option key. I did that accidentally. I don't use these tools very often. So the most you can get with the widget is 11. If you want more sides, then you have to hold the Option key down and use the dialog. So that goes up to 11. If I want a 12-sided polygon, then I have to use the dialog box. So I have to hold down the Option key when I click. And draw some more stars. I think we can explore this a little bit more. So if you do a really shallow, like not a lot of difference between the two, then you end up with a like a very chubby looking star, right? So like this. If you add more difference, sharper, if you really give it a lot of difference, then it's super pointy. So that's kind of the way that that's the way you work with the star, right? Is like, what's the kind of effect that you're trying to look for, right? And then you can kind of get a sense for that. And again, like with my direct selection tool, I can go in here and I can actually modify these shapes too. So I can modify the anchor points. Not really loving how this is looking like this with all the different overlapping, so I'm gonna kind of stop doing that. And some of these were drawn with the star tool. That's kind of extreme. Yeah, that's still giving me that very shallow. They're equal, so. Well, you guys get the idea. I want you to do 24 of these. Kind of like that one. Okay. So for our last exercise here, it's going to be an exercise of arranging shapes. So far we've just been drawing shapes randomly on the stage. So we've really been, paying attention to, there is a ellipse here, or there's a circle here, and there's a circle here, and they're filled, so it doesn't really matter which is on top of the other. Now we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to show you how to change the position of shapes in relation to each other, whether or not they're overlapping, or if they're in front or behind. And there's a couple of ways that I'm going to show you how to do that. One is more for visualizing it, but you can also edit it too. And the other one is just to quickly change the order. So if I drop my circle here, and I give it a fill of white, see, I can't see the things behind there anymore. So if I go ahead and drag this across, and I go Command D, now I have them in this order that I want them. It happened to turn out that way. But if I made a mistake, because it'll draw the last one that you drew in front. Let's say I drew these two, and I moved it over here. That works. But what if I drew it like, okay, I'm gonna try and mess this up on purpose. I draw this here, and then I draw this one last. I'm like, okay, well, I need this one to be in front of this one. How do I do that? Well, first of all, I want to show you again the layers palette. The layers palette allows you to hide and show layers, lock layers, and also show what's inside of layers. So here you can see that this object that I've selected is on this layer here, which is called draw here, because it's highlighted here with this red dot, right? If I deselect, that dot disappears. If I select something and it's on that layer, it's going to highlight it. I can hide this layer entirely by turning this eyeball on and off. I can also lock this layer so that I can't move the objects that are on it. You can see that this grid that I gave you guys is locked. So if you guys unlock it, you're going to be able to move this rasterized image behind it. So keep that locked. What I want you to do is select this last one here and click on the chevron here beside the thumbnail. Here you can see that the layers palette has the eyeball to hide and show. There's a lock here, so it locks it and unlocks it. There's a thumbnail, there's a name. This here shows if something's selected. It also allows you to select everything on that layer. If I select this and I go to this, here, this thumbnail, right beside the thumbnail is a little chevron. If I click on it, it rotates down. And this allows me to see all the contents of this layer. So all the things you've been drawing are all here during this whole exercise. These are the last things that we drew here, which are the 4 ellipses. I can actually take one of these elements and move it to a different position here. And you didn't notice a difference because there, it did. So that changes the position of things in the stacking order of them. So it's not always going to be apparent, because if it's, second and you move it to third, it may not overlap the thing that's beside it, right? So what I want to do is I want to actually move this one, and this one to the top, because this one goes to the bottom. I could also just take this one and move it to the bottom. So I could just take it like this and move it to the bottom. So that's one way. Probably the one that gives you the most control is the layers palette. So rearranging these things here is probably the way that gives you the most control, but it can be a little bit cumbersome if you have a lot of elements in a layer. It can be hard to find the ones that you're looking for. So another way to do it that's a little easier, and I'm just gonna take these and drag them down here. So again, I did a selection marquee, and I'm dragging and holding the Option key down, Shift key, that gives me a copy of my elements. I'm going to select this one, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go Arrange, Send to Back. And one disadvantage of using that is it sends it all the way to the bottom of that layer. So if you're trying to keep those things together, it's not that great. I'm going to show you guys a trick. Well, I'm going to show it to you now. So one way to keep these elements together, both on the stage and in their stacking order here, is to select them all and group them. So here you can see now we have a group of these elements. And now, if I want to send it to the back, I have a couple of options. One is I can go back and thinking about the 2 selection tools that we have. If I take the direct selection tool, I can just choose that one. If I right click and I go Arrange, Send to Back, it sends it to the back of the group. And that way I keep my elements together. So that's one thing that a group does, is it keeps them together, both, their X and Y position to each other, but also this other position, which is the Z position, which is the stacking order. So I can go ahead and select this one and this one. So I'm holding my Shift key down. So click, Shift, right click, Arrange, Send to Back. And then I can do the same thing here. Right click, Arrange, Send to Back. So that is Arrange. It's definitely worth practicing. So what I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to get you to do the same thing here, but I'm going to get you to do a longer one. So I want you to use quite a few shapes. I haven't specified here how many, but I want you to start by drawing your shapes so they can be in any direction or order that you want. I just want you to be able to control the stacking order. So if you start off like this and you have these shapes that are going to create this staircase that's going to go all the way around this shape, and maybe you want them all to be squares and maybe you don't, it's up to you. And I'm just going to keep going here, keep going all the way around. grew up in South America, and this guy that I knew when I was down there as a kid just connected with me on Facebook yesterday. And he has like a pool in his front yard, and he has steps like this, but they're not the never-ending steps. Here I'm going to drag this down here. And do I want this one to go in front of this one? I'm going to see if one of you can figure out how to do that to make it so that it goes endlessly. So that this one ends up underneath that one, but on top of that one. A bit of a challenge. But I want you to not stop there. I want you to do more stairs. So coming back to here. I want you to fill the whole. Again, I want you to spend some time thinking about how you can change the order of these layers. So if you want this one to lead up to here and then down, or if you want it to continue up. So how would you figure out how to take this one and bring it down to this layer here? So you got to be able to know how to change the order of these steps. So this is your last exercise for this one. I want you to fill the whole page, and I want you to really control which goes where, which shape goes where. One way that might be easier to figure it out is to go and start at different corners, like this. So you're not just drawing a circle around here. Start by filling in these corners here, and then once you start to overlap them, now you're going to want to change the order of these. So I can select this one and go arrange, bring to front, and now I have some steps there. But I'm going to want to connect them with the rest of the staircase. So the best way to do it is, of course, to take them all and group them together. Now, one of the challenges is if you want to add more, you're going to have to draw within the group. So here is, I'm going to show you how to do this. It's a little bit complicated, but it's going to save you a lot of grief if it happens to you by accident. And that is, select this group here and double click on it. And this takes you into a mode that's called isolation mode. So you can see that the other layers in my layer palette have actually disappeared, and all I can see is this group here. There's also this new bar that appeared along the top, which shows me that I'm drawing inside this group. If this happens to you by mistake, so if you accidentally, so let's pretend that you're over here and you're drawing, and you double click on a shape, and now all of a sudden you can't select anything, don't panic. You're in isolation mode. So it's this way of drawing that's actually allows you to isolate some elements and draw just those specific ones. And sometimes it happens by accident. So all you have to do is go and click on this arrow here to escape. You get into isolation mode by double clicking on an object. Like I said, sometimes it happens by accident. If you double click on the object, it takes you to isolation mode. If you double click outside of the object, it'll take you out. So I can do the same thing here. This is a group. I can double click on it. I can go grab my rectangle tool, and I can start drawing again inside my stairs. So that's it. So go ahead and finish this one, and then you can jump over to the exercise geometric shapes. Make sure you save it.